Welcome to the West Pharmaceutical webinar. We are the co-host for today's webinar. My name is Ankit Kankar. I'm the product manager for Biospectrum Asia. Biospectrum is an integrated B2B media platform for the bioscience industry in the Asia Pacific region. It engages its readers from pharma, biotech, and medtech industry segments through its media products and services at daily, fortnightly, and monthly frequencies across countries in Asia Pacific. It is also a one-stop information hub on Asia bioscience industry for the readers from US and Europe. Before we start the webinar, there are few house rules. Let me take through. All participants are placed in mute and listen only mode. In case you have any questions, please type them into the question and answer chat panel when question and answer window pop up. We will answer few questions after the presentation is finished if time permits. There are few polling questions throughout the webinar that we hope you can participate by selecting an appropriate response. This webinar will also be available on demand. And today's speaker is Quang Coakley. Let me take you a brief role of Coakley. Coakley, associated with West Pharmaceutical Service Singapore since 10 years, Coakley has been involved in the technical support of customers in the Asia Pacific. To address technical issues, she works closely with customers and provides solutions to accelerate customers' time market. Let me introduce Coakley. Hi, Coakley.
Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Thank you for taking time to attend this webinar on the requirements of the latest elemental impurities regulations. So today we'll be taking a look at the elemental impurities and its relation with container closure systems. And before we start the presentation proper, we'd just like to have a better understanding of the audience that's participating in today's webinar. So if you could just answer this polling question with regards to your role in your current organization. How would you describe your role in your organization? Are you from the formulation development team, from packaging development, quality, production, supply chain, or from the commercial aspects or other functions? We would like to see your vote, and we'll close the vote in about 10 seconds. So if you could just click on the screen that you're seeing. Okay, thank you everybody for voting. So I think we do see that a big proportion of the team is from the formulation development as well as from the commercial function. So let me get back to my presentation proper. So we'll start the presentation by first going through the requirements of the ICH Q3D, which is really focused on the elemental impurities and the associated requirements and testing. So the scope for the ICH Q3D elemental impurities. So ICH actually stands for the International Council for Harmonization, and they have provided a guidance with regards to the amount of elemental impurities which is allowed in the drugs. So the ICH Q3D guidance is applicable for finished new drugs, for new drugs which contain existing drug substances, for certain small molecules, and also for the biologics such as monoclonal antibodies, recombinant proteins, etc. Some types of the drug products are excluded, so you could refer to the ICH Q3D guidance for more details whether your drug actually falls under the impacted list of products. It does not apply to drugs which are still within the clinical development phase. And there is the expectation that when you are applying for a marketing application, you would need to apply the principles of ICH Q3D to guide your development. So the ICH Q3D is applicable to many regions worldwide. So it's applicable to the European Union, to Switzerland, Japan, USA, and Canada. So majority of the regulated markets are actually following the ICH Q3D guidance, and applies to new finished drug products as well as for drug products which contain existing drug substances. So why is there such a focus on elemental impurities? Because based on the ICHQ 3D guidance, the elemental impurities do not contribute any therapeutic benefits to the patient. And that is why we actually have to control their levels in the drug product to an acceptable limit. And of course, for these elements which have high permitted daily exposure, then we would actually also have to consider its impact on the quality control standpoint, because any additional elements that's appearing in your drug product itself is considered, additional compounds that that are not needed. And I think in the past, we have also seen incidences whereby some of these elemental elements have actually interacted with the drug product and caused either a safety issue to the patient or has resulted in a decreased efficacy for the patient itself. So I think in the past, we have seen issues whereby the zinc had interacted with the drug product and caused the effectiveness of the considerations that we have seen when considering the elemental impurities. So we come to the next polling question. So I think to understand from the audience, have you started to implement the elemental impurities testing per ICHQ3 for your drug products? Because this is actually pretty newly implemented at the start of this year. So we'd like to understand what our audience has already started doing. Okay, thank you for voting. So I see that majority of us has already started to implement this testing for our drug products, and there are some that are maybe have not implemented because maybe you're not exporting to the countries of concern, or you're not so sure. So let me run through and go through what is actually in the ICHQ 3D. So the ICHQ 3D actually expects the drug manufacturers to follow this process. So this is a recommended process to address the elemental impurities concern. Firstly is to identify the sources of elemental impurities that are known or suspected or may have the potential to end up in the finished drug product. So these may be coming from the manufacturing process, from the API, from the excipients, etc. So this could be some of the potential sources that the elemental impurities may come from. So from there, there would be the need to determine the probability of occurrence of the elemental impurities in the finished dosage form. So you will actually have to analyze the risk whereby the elemental impurities may pose to your drug product. Next is to evaluate, which you will actually have to conduct an assessment of the actual or predicted levels of elemental impurities, and also cross-reference them against the established permitted daily exposures. So this would actually help you to establish the risk that the elemental impurities may bring to your drug product. And last but not least, after understanding where the sources and where the probability of occurrence may be coming from, as well as what are the predicted levels, it is important to actually implement a control on the drug product itself to ensure that there is a limit that is being placed on the elemental impurities so that they do not actually exceed the safety dosage. So these are the elements which are included in the ICHQ 3D to be considered in the risk assessment. So there's a total of 24 elements listed here. And additionally, they have also highlighted 10 more elements which may bring about product quality concerns. So the top 24 elements are actually classified into 4 different classes based on the toxicity that they may bring and also the likelihood of them appearing in the drug product itself. So you can see over here that if the element is intentionally added, meaning maybe it could be part of your excipient or maybe part of your API itself, then you would actually have to analyze all 24 elements in the drug product. And if they are not intentionally added, then it would be based on the route of administration. So for example, for the oral drugs, you would only need to consider the class 1 and class 2A, which are the highly toxic elements as well as most likely to be present. And if you're actually doing a parenteral and inhalation drug, then it brings the list bigger to 10 elements, because you would also have to consider the additional 3 that are classified under class 3. So these are the elements to be considered during your risk assessment in your finished drug product based on the type of application as well as whether is it intentionally or unintentionally added. So the risk assessment considerations presented in the ICHQ 3D guidance identifies the three main components that you will have to consider during your risk assessment. Number one is the evaluation of the toxicity data for the elemental impurities. Next is to establish what is the permitted dosage, daily exposure values for each of these elements. And then last but not least, is important to establish a control for limiting the inclusion of these elemental impurities. So these are the guidance for the risk assessment that is highlighted in the ICHQ 3D. So we come to the next polling question. We have seen that some of our participants has already implemented the ICHQ 3D testing, and some have not. So I think we would like to understand what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced when regarding the elemental impurities. So are you unsure about what's the test procedure, unsure of what is the specification, unsure how to actually establish the source of your elemental impurities, or if you're not doing elemental impurities currently? Okay, thank you for participating in the polling. So I think we see that the biggest challenge that the audience face currently is unsure how to establish the sources of elemental impurities, which brings us to our next point as well. So the potential sources of elemental impurities may come from many forms. So the testing itself is focused on the finished drug product, but anywhere and anything that is involved in your production process may actually contribute to the elemental impurities presence in the final drug product. So the sources of elemental impurities may come from the manufacturing equipment or processes, particularly many of the filling lines, etc., are made from stainless steel. So there could be some inherent sources of elemental impurities in this equipment or in the process. The drug substance itself, in terms of the API, the water system may actually also contribute to elemental impurities, the excipients that you are using, and that's why I think there may be some limits that's applied for the excipients. And last but not least, which is also our focus topic today, is the contribution of elemental impurities from the container closure system. So the important thing is that you must be able to show evidence that the container closure system does not contribute significantly or adversely to the elemental impurities in your drug product. So to do this, you must be able to show scientific evidence. So it is not just based on a past experience that you have not seen it appearing, and therefore you conclude that it will not be a risk. But you must be able to have scientific data to show this. And also, the elemental impurities is typically conducted as part of the extractables and leachables testing. So as part of the E&L testing, we would recommend to include the analysis of elemental impurities as part of this study. And that actually helps you to look at the packaging system and the container closure system in totality. And this would also be able to help you in your risk assessment. So these are part of providing the scientific evidence to establish the safety of your container closure systems. So to understand the risk that may be contributed from a container closure system, I think we will need to understand what are the likely interactions that may occur. If you understand that the material of construction of the packaging system does not demonstrate a high risk of elemental impurities, then if you are able to justify it, then there will be no additional risk assessment that is required. So for example, if you're using a plastic material for your container system, then you are able to show that it has a the material of construction does not pose a significant risk, then that could be an area to justify. Or if not, then you would actually have to understand what are the potential extractables and leachables that may be coming from your container system. And this should be applied following the sterilization process. because the processing of the components itself may contribute to a difference in the extractables, and as a result, the elemental impurities profile. So these should actually be conducted on the actual processed components. And next, the various materials, drug and elemental conditions should also be factored in. So for example, the drug may interact with the packaging system to cause the extraction of some of these elements. Then that should also be part of the testing itself. So as a result of the implementation of the ICHQ3D, that actually has an impact on the United States Pharmacopoeia as well. So the USP Chapter 231, which is on the heavy metals, has actually been determined to be incomplete because it tests on a combined heavy metals testing, and it does not actually factor in all the different toxic heavy metals. And the test method itself is not quantitative. So there is a possibility that it may actually result in a false positive or false negative. So the results that you get by using this method may actually be inaccurate. So that is why this chapter 231 has actually been made obsolete at the beginning of this year. So a new monograph has been introduced, monograph 232, which targets a greater number of elemental impurities. So it's not just based on the lead that was in the historical 231. And it also recommends methods which are more sensitive. So instead of a visual testing, it's actually doing a quantitative testing instead. And the focus is more on the individual elements rather than the total heavy metals. So what's happened to the USP monograph is that the USP 231 has been withdrawn, and in its place it has been new monograph 232, which is focused on elemental impurities limits, and 233, which is on the test procedures, have been introduced to replace the 231, and is effective in the beginning of this year. So I think for our audience that has actually started to do the elemental impurities testing, you might be actually referencing this 232 and 233 monograph instead. And the 232 is actually very closely aligned with the ICHQ3D and provides limits for the amount of elemental impurities that is allowed in the drug product itself. So you do see here that the focus is on the finished drug product. So the ICHQ3D has been effective since June 2016 for new marketing authorization, and it allowed for a transition period for the marketing products, but the transition period has actually been passed since last year. So the ICHQ3D is effective since December 2017 for all drug products. And the USP 232 and 233 has been implemented with effect from beginning of this year as well. So again, the focus is on the entire drug package. It should be tested per this requirement. And there are actually no specific elemental impurities requirements that is called out for the individual components in the drug product system. So they actually did not establish a limit for the elemental impurities for the packaging system, such as rubber stoppers, glass vials, etc. So they have stated that the elemental impurity should be indicated for the finished drug product in its total packaging. So next we come to our next polling question, which is on the how are you managing the data regarding potential elemental impurities from the packaging components. So you may be doing the testing, or you may be actually asking your suppliers to support your compliance to ICHQ3D. Okay, thank you for your participation. So I think we see big number of the audience are actually asking the component supplier to support compliance to ICHQ3D, as well as you are also implementing the testing in-house on your finished drug product. So that's good. So what we have seen is that there must be a good understanding of the contribution of elemental impurities from the packaging system, because the packaging system itself, for example, the rubber closures and glass valves are actually in direct contact with the drug, and so they have the potential to contribute additional amounts of elemental impurities. And this is not just pertaining to any type of specific type of component. It is applicable to plastic, elastomer, glass, etc. And so it is important to be able to establish the testing method as well as the specifications to enable a decision for you to decide whether is this packaging system suitable for your intended use. So from a packaging material standpoint, most of the extractable elements do not have a demonstrated toxicity, and usually they do not pose a direct safety concern. But of course, we will still have to assess and quantify them to ensure that there is no potential impact to the drug quality. So this one would not really be directly a toxicity consideration, but it would be more of a product quality impact that we are considering when we look at the elemental impurity contribution from the packaging materials. Because most of these packaging materials do not actually contain intentionally added elemental elements. So as a result of the ICHQ 3D implementation and the obsolescence of the USP 231 chapter, there has been a change that has been correspondingly proposed for the USP 381, which is applicable for the elastomeric closures that is used in the parenterals and injectables. So there was a proposed change being made in March 2017, but so far it has not been approved or published yet. There is another round of review at the end of this year. So the USP 381 currently still contains the historic USP 231 testing, but because the 231 has to be made obsolete, so the current USP 41 revision bulletin has actually replaced the heavy metals test method into the 381 instead. So from a rubber closure standpoint, we are still practicing the old heavy metals method. Although I think we do foresee a change to the elemental impurities testing upcoming in the next revision. So the historic 231 method is more of a qualitative testing. So you can see here it is a visual check to see, it compares against a standard solution to see how does the color match up to the standard solution. Whereas in the proposed change to the USP 381, whereby the analysis is done by a quantitative method such as ICP, it actually gives a quantitative value to the amounts of elements that is being found in the packaging, in the rubber closure itself. So you can see here, this is an example of the ICP analysis that is being done for the rubber closure. So it actually gives a quantitative indication of the amounts of elements that may be present. So the 381, the change to the 381 is actually more specific, because in the past, the 231 is actually tested based on the totality for heavy metals and expressed as a pass-fail. So, it could be, it is a very subjective testing because it's more of a visual testing. And whereas the new proposed method that is stated in the proposed 381, you will test via ICP method or equivalent and report as found. So it actually gives a quantitative result. But again, you will notice that the USP does not state a limit for these elements itself. So the 381 actually considers 10 elements which are covered in the ICHQ 3D plus an additional zinc to be considered. So these are tested and then reported as found, and there are no specifications as of now being implemented on this. The main reason is that they would want the drug manufacturer to actually do a risk assessment to consider the impact of these amounts that are being found. So in terms of data usage, the new USP 381 would give you a quantitative result, and that is reported in microgram per component. And using this result, it would help in the risk assessment for the finished drug product itself. So again, the focus itself is on the finished drug product. So these are the specific elements of interest for parenterals listed in the proposed 381 change. So we will look at the elements that are of a high risk, including the zinc. And the 381 actually talks about the method to be used, and the recommended method is either by ICP OES or by ICP MS. And then the results are reported as is. So the sensitivity threshold for this test method must be achieved. So it should be greater than 0.05 microgram, then you'll be able to report the results. So that is the sensitivity of the method itself. So in conclusion, I think that is the what the ICH-Q3D about. There has been a new industry and compliance guidances that has been introduced regarding drug product testing along for elemental impurities. And really, the approach taken is to take a scientific evidence, to provide scientific evidence and taking a risk-based approach to understand holistically where are the sources of elemental impurities. And so, because packaging system itself may be a potential source of the elemental impurities, so we must understand where the elemental impurities are coming from and what are their potential amount that may be contributed from a packaging system. So again, in summary, the concern is really most on the impact of these elemental impurities on your finished drug product. So even if the packaging system does not contain the elemental impurities, we still have to look at the finished drug product to ensure that they are not being impacted by elemental impurities that are coming from other sources. So really the important question to ask yourself is what is in our drug product, and do they pose any safety or toxicity issue to your patients? So that is all I have for the elemental impurities. So before we end the webinar, I would just like to introduce the West Knowledge Center. So West has actually implemented a West Knowledge Center on our westpharma.com website. So we'll encourage our audience to actually sign up and register to get an account with us on our West Knowledge Center, whereby you are able to access a whole list of technical documents that would be really helpful for you in terms of the different testing. And one of the focus topic in here, I think we also have the elemental impurities. So if you go onto this website, you can actually get more information with regards to elemental impurities testing as well. So yeah, so thank you for your time. I think we will be able to take some questions. So let me just take a look at that. So I think slide that will actually be will be shared with the participants after the webinar is concluded. So I think Biospectrum will follow up to send the link to download this presentation as well.
Yes, sure. And once the event is over, now we are enabling the question answer mode.
Okay, so I think we have a question here that asked how does West support our customers in terms of the data that we have generated. So because the USP 381, the change has not been officially implemented, but West has actually taken one step forward, and we have started to do the analysis for formulations per the recommended per the proposed change. So we do have data available per the USP 381 change. So that it would be one information that we can share with our customers based on our formulation. That is a one-off testing and customers can use that data to aid in your risk assessment. And of course, from a regulatory standpoint, our regulatory department can also support with a compliance certificate that states that we do not intentionally use any of these ICHQ3D elements. So that is another source of support that we can give to our customers. So in case you need these documents, please feel free to reach out to your account manager or your technical support person, and we will be able to support this. So majority of our formulations would have this. So the recommended formulations would have these documents available. if the data from West previously. So West is currently only providing the 10 elements for the elemental impurities. So why are we not testing for all 24? So the reason is that we are following the USP 381 for these, of which only the 10 plus 1 elements are listed. So that's why we test for these 10 elements and not for the full 24. For the full 24, we would be able to provide a compliance statement instead. Yeah, because for the full 24, they are applicable for finished drug products. So that's why West is applicable for the elastomeric closures testing instead. So there is also a question on how to fix the API excipients and packaging materials. Yeah, so the question is, so how to fix the limits of the API excipients and packing materials? Again, this would be related to the risk assessment that you have. And also, what is the application that you are looking at? Yeah. So the ICH-Q3D does provide a recommendation on the limits for the finished drug products to actually take a look at the toxicity impact of these elements. So from there, then you can actually see where are the contributing factors, and from there set the safe limit. So there's no one standard limit across the board. So really, it depends on the data that you are getting from each of these, from the API, from the excipients, and from the packaging material. Because maybe one of the source might actually contribute a higher amount. So as a result, then you may have to be more stringent with that particular compound instead. Yeah, and if for example, like the packaging material is carrying a very low risk, then you might actually not need to have such a stringent limit for those. Consideration, we might not be able to take them. So we'll follow up individually with each of you for the outstanding questions that we have not been able to take them now. Yeah, so thank you for your time for participating in this webinar. We will share the slide decks after this session. Yeah, and so thank you everybody. Yeah, in case you have any additional questions that you have after going through the slide deck, please feel free to send them to Biospectrum, and they would actually forward that to us to address. Yes. Thank you.